立法會主席。
The President. Questions. Question number 1, Mr. Gary Fan. Thank you, President. There will be a shortfall of around 1,400 P1 places in the North District in the 2013-2014 school year, and the allocation results of the central allocation exercise under the Primary 1 admission system for that school year will be released on the 1st of June this year. The Secretary for Education had indicated early this year that by then, students of the North District who have been allocated P1 places in the Tai Po District may apply for reallocation of P1 places in the North District. And this is called the reallocation mechanism. The authorities will address their wish to study in their home district by increasing the number of P1 places in the North District. In this connection, will government inform this Council A whether all students of North District who have been allocated P1 places in schools outside their home district in the POA central allocation exercise can be reallocated P1 places in the North District under the aforesaid reallocation mechanism. If they cannot, whether the Bureau has other measures to help such students gain admission to schools in the North District. Of the measures the Education Bureau has put in place to ensure that such students will be admitted to their favorite schools under the reallocation mechanism. B. Of the respective numbers of cross-boundary students applying for P1 places in the North District, Tai Po, Sha Tin, Yuen Long, and Tuen Mun during the central allocation stage in the school year, together with the number of such students in each district who were allocated places in schools in other districts due to insufficient school places. And C. Of the respective numbers of places borrowed from schools in Tai Po and Sha Tin in the past 3 school years and the current school year to cater for students of other districts, whether the schools concerned originally had surplus places, whether such a measure of borrowing school places would affect the chances of students of the 2 districts being allocated places in their favorite schools in their home districts, how the Bureau will assist students of the 2 districts in gaining admission to their favorite schools in their home districts. I hope that members will put their questions according to the form and the wording previously submitted. President, the existing P1 admission system comprises 2 stages, discretionary places admission stage and central allocation stage. At the central allocation stage, parents may firstly choose up to 3 schools in or outside the school net in which they reside, and the remaining school choices are restricted to schools in their respective school net. In the light of the continuous upsurge of cross-boundary students and the propensity to choose schools in the North District under the POA, the Education Bureau announced on the 1st of February this year to implement the special measures this year to facilitate the return of P1 students in the North District to their home district for study. Upon the release of this year's POA allocation results, students who reside in the North District and have chosen a school net in the North District during their POA allocation but have been allocated a P1 place in Tai Po in the central allocation stage and subsequently decided to give up the allocated P1 place with a view to studying in their home district instead, will be arranged a P1 place in the North District. However, these students will not be provided with any choice of schools. The special measures mentioned above are not applicable to other students allocated with a P1 place in Tai Po, including cross-boundary students of the North District. As in the past, students who would like to give up their allocated places due to whatever reasons may approach other schools direct on their own with effect from the 2nd of July this year. The North District School Development section of our Bureau will provide assistance to parents as appropriate. B. In the POA this year, the number of cross-boundary students choosing a school net in North, Tai Po, Yuen Long, and Tuen Mun districts as their school net during the central allocation stage are around 1,230, 270, 290, and 340 respectively. School nets in Sha Tin are not open for selection by cross-boundary students. Among North, Tai Po, Yuen Long, and Tuen Mun districts, only students of the North District amounting to less than 400 have been allocated places in a neighboring district, and that is Tai Po, and less than 200 of them are residing in the North District. C. About 80, 130, 350, and less than 400 P1 places were borrowed from Tai Po to meet the demand in the North District in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, respectively. No places were borrowed from Sha Tin to other districts. Under the POA system, the 18 districts in the territory are divided into 36 school nets. It is unrealistic to expect that the supply of school places would fully meet the demand in individual districts or school nets every year. The demand and supply of school places in individual districts or school nets is subject to year-on-year changes due to various factors, including the number of newly arrived students, redevelopment of public housing estates, development of individual schools, and so on and so forth. We've established effective measures to cope with the year-on-year changes in demand and supply of school places, and these include borrowing places from neighboring district school nets or school nets, using vacant classrooms, converting rooms of other purposes into classrooms. The POA system is designed to alleviate the pressure on children of tender age arising from competition for school places and its adverse effect on pre-primary education. It also aims to provide an orderly and convenient way for parents to seek school admission for their children. We encourage parents to acquaint themselves with the allocated schools so as to facilitate homeschool cooperation and helping students' personal development. Mr. Gary Fan, I think my question has not been adequately answered. My question is what measures there are to make sure that for students in the North District who are allocated Tai Po school places, how they can be relocated school places in the North District. The figure 1230 is mentioned in para B, and then in para C, it is said that last year 400 P1 places were borrowed from Tai Po to meet the demand in the North District. So I think there is a very big gap between the two numbers. Can I ask the Secretary how many additional school places there will be in the North District? And are there still classrooms or other rooms available for the reallocation mechanism? And I want to know in the North District, how many classes will have a class size exceeding 33? Secretary, President, concerning part B of the reply, we are talking about a number of cross-boundary students choosing a school net in North, Tai Po, Yuen Long, and Tuen Mun districts as a school net during the central allocation stage. For Tai Po, the number was 270. So in other words, we have 270 cross-boundary students choosing Tai Po as their school net. And then the 400 in para C is about the number of places borrowed from Tai Po in 2013. We have the special measures to help North District students. Now, if these students are allocated school places in Tai Po and they don't want to take up those places, they can return to the North District. And we're of the view that there shouldn't be more than 200 students to be dealt with under special measures. And in 2013-2014, we should be able to more or less meet the target of a class size of 33 in North District schools. But of course, everything will depend on the number of students applying for special measures, and also we'll be doing a head count in the middle of September. Mr. Tony Chair. President, concerning the reallocation mechanism, will that exert any pressure on teachers? And is there an adequate number of teachers? Secretary. President. we will provide professional support and additional resources for schools in the North District so that schools in the North District can continue to adopt the present teaching strategies. In fact, we've already reached a consensus of schools in the North District. In 2013-2014, we'll have a class size of 30 at P1 for small class teaching, and then we will also provide an APM post for the school. And then concerning number of places in or at P1 level, if there is a need to increase the size to beyond 30, then there will be a cash allowance for each student from P1 to P6 in order to make sure that teaching will still be effective. And in fact, the subsidy or the cash allowance is based on additional numbers over and above the 30, and the cash allowance is based on the unit cost for each student. Mr. Gary Chen, President, I want to say that the reallocation mechanism cannot really solve the root of the problem. In fact, we have been in the North District have been suffering from a shortage of school places many years, and I think streaming and other permanent measures need to be put in place. President, if parents opt for the reallocation mechanism or the return mechanism and they want school places in the North District for their children, they do not want the typo places, then does it mean that they've given up their typo places? And will this reallocation or return mechanism create administrative confusion for schools in Tai Po? And if a parent has given up the school place in Tai Po, then can that school place be made available for another student in Tai Po? Secretary. President, if parents in the North District decide that they do not want to take up the school places in Tai Po and they want to go back to North District, they have to first of all give up their children's school places in Tai Po. And under our mechanism, there we will use the computer system to randomly allocate school places in North District for these children. And then concerning the school places given up in Tai Po, now I want to say that under the school place allocation mechanism, Tai Po students have already been allocated school places. Now, my question has not been answered, President, and that is whether the return or reallocation mechanism will create administrative chaos or confusion for secondary schools in Tai Po. Secretary. President, with regard to the implementation details of the special measures, I want to say that after the 1st of June, when the allocation results are out, P1 students will get a registration letter, and those eligible for the special measures will also get a blue, an appendix in blue. And we hope that parents can inform us of our decision on around the 17th. And then on the 24th, we will inform parents of the results of the random allocation, and then parents can take their children to schools in the North District on the 26th and on the 27th for registration. In other words, the entire process will be completed within the month of June, and so we will try to minimize any administrative inconvenience caused to secondary schools in Tai Po. Mr. Kim Yun, I think the administration is silent in its reply on one principle, and that is school children should be studying near their homes. And I think sound planning has not been done. We have seen so many problems in recent years, and I want to say that the situation will only get worse in the coming years. Now, this is a graph that I have compiled. There will be a surge in the number of cross-boundary students in the years to come. And in fact, for cross-boundary kindergarten students, the number has exceeded 7,000. And it is very likely that they will want to study in the North District for P1 in the coming year. Now, we have seen a lot of confusion, and I am worried that there will be more confusion, more serious confusion in the coming years, and you can't build a school within 1 or 2 years. Mr. Yip, I think you have already asked your question. Let the Secretary reply. Yes, President. Concerning cross-boundary students wishing to study in the North District, it is not that the government hasn't done its planning work. But then concerning the number of cross-boundary students coming to the North District to study every year, it's difficult to come up with an accurate estimate. After all, it's the parents' choice, and there are many factors at play. But then we believe that there will be an increase in the number of cross-boundary students in the coming years. Now, concerning children born of non-mainland or born of mainland parents, non-local parents. Now, I understand that the measure has already stopped, but then of course we will see a surge in 2017, 2018, and so the special measures we've implemented this year may not be able to solve the problems we may encounter in the future. And that is why we need to work out reasonable and lawful measures to try to give priority to North District students. And we also hope to minimize the number of students who have to go to school in another district. In fact, we've heard a lot of suggestions and options from different sectors in the community, and we will be considering these suggestions and options, and we will announce our decision at a suitable time. Mr. Ip, now, I am asking him how the problems can be resolved, and he is telling me that he knows that the problems are serious and so solutions need to be worked out, but I want to know what options or suggestions are being considered. Secretary, can you tell members what options and suggestions are being considered? President, let me give an example. We are considering the following. In a particular school net, can we give priority to students in the same district? And then for surplus places in the school net, can that constitute a separate school net for cross-boundary students? And another option being considered is whether we can operate schools in Shenzhen running the Hong Kong curriculum. But of course, these are complicated issues, and we need to consider all the relevant factors. And so we're not able to offer any option at the moment. Mr. Lee. Yes, President. Now, in fact, schools and parents in North District started to sound warnings a few years ago. They were worried that more and more students would have to go into another district to study. And now I understand that we have the return or reallocation mechanism. But this mechanism can only alleviate the problem this year. The class size may have to be increased, classrooms or rooms may have to be converted into classrooms. And Mr. Gary Chan has said the school place allocation system has to be revised and revamped, and better streaming needs to be done. So can the Secretary promise to come up with a sound streaming method for parents before parents select schools in the coming school year, so that parents do not need to be worried about the supply of school places in the next school year? Yes, President. We understand that for the school place allocation exercise in 2014, we need to, in September this year, explain all the arrangements to parents and schools. And so our objective is to come up with a comprehensive and sound package before September this year. Mr. Leung Chi-cheung. President, there is a real shortage of school places in the North District. And I understand that members of the public are very discontented. In fact, parents have petitioned the government on a number of occasions. And because of the parents' discontent, the Education Bureau was forced to adopt the return or reallocation mechanism this year to try to appease the parents. But as other members have pointed out, this mechanism can't really solve the root of the problem. At the moment, cross-boundary students can go to North, Tai Po, Yuen Long, and Tuen Mun. But I understand that, in fact, there are vacant places available in other school nets. So for cross-boundary students living in Shenzhen, if they live near Shenzhen Bay, then can they come to Yuen Long and Tuen Mun? And then for those living near Lo Wu, can they be channeled to North and Tai Po? And I think it's important that students be channeled to school nets where there are surplus places. Or can the government try to promote the education system in, or explain the education system in Hong Kong to parents in Shenzhen? And also, can there be smoother cross-boundary traffic for the students? President, if that's to be done, then we need to have detailed information as to the distribution in Shenzhen, for example, of cross-boundary students who wish to come to study in Hong Kong. And we also need to know their plans, whether they do plan to come to study in Hong Kong. And it may be rather difficult to get hold of such information. And then as to whether we can operate schools running the Hong Kong curriculum in the mainland. As I have said just now, there are many factors which need to be considered. For example, we need to Secretary, the member is not talking about operating schools in the mainland. He is talking about distribution of relevant materials in the mainland. President, in fact, such materials are available on our website concerning how the materials can reach the hands of the parents in Shenzhen. That may be a big problem. So I said your question has not been answered. Now for cross-boundary students, please repeat that part which has not been answered. I think for cross-boundary students, I think the cross-boundary arrangements need to be improved upon. Secretary, we understand that it will be good if we can achieve a streaming effect. In fact, every year we, together with the Security Bureau and the Transport Department, try to work out improvement measures at the various border crossing points. We're trying to increase the capacity of these border crossing points. We've spent over 23 minutes on this one. We'll move on to the next question.
Mr. Albert Ho, thank you, President. Some members of the public have relayed to me that the Chief Executive has yet to give a direct account of the whole story concerning the unauthorized building works, UBWs, in its mention on Peel Rise or Peel Rise mention, since such UBWs were uncovered in June last year, when he was about to assume the office of CE. And the way in which the Buildings Department BD handles this case is different from that for handling the UBWs uncovered in a mansion on York Road or York Road Mansion, which belongs to another candidate who stood in the 2012 CE election, thus causing members of the public to suspect that the authorities have been selective in taking law enforcement actions. In this connection, would the government inform this council, A, as it has been reported that the Director of Buildings indicated on the 7th of May this year that the UBWs in the Peel Rise Mansion have been demolished, the underground space had been dealt with, and the space beneath the parking space had also been filled up. And yet the CE's office mentioned in reply to press inquiries on the following day that CE was still discussing the remedial proposal with BD in respect of the unlawfully constructed enclosed area of some 200 square feet on the lower ground floor of the Peel Rise Mansion, whether the situation referred to by the Director is the actual situation at present, which of the UBWs in the Peel Rise Mansion have yet to be demolished and restored to the original structure. B, as he had already indicated at the end of November last year that he would discuss with BD the way to handle the unlawfully constructed enclosed area in the Peel Rise Mansion mentioned in A, whether BD and C have already reached a consensus in respect of the remedial proposal for the said UBW so far. If they have not, whether it has assessed the causes for this situation, and whether this is attributable to direction of duty on the part of BD staff or the property owner being uncooperative in the case, of the number of times BD has contacted the property owner to discuss the remedial proposal for the said UBW and what the replies given by the property owners are. And C, given that BD issued summons in February this year to prosecute the agent of the owner of the York Road Mansion and the authorized persons appointed by her for carrying out unlawful building works, and to prosecute the said authorized person for misrepresentation, whether the authorities are adopting the same standard in handling the case involving the UBWs in the Peel Rise Mansion. If they are not, of the reasons for that. Secretary for Development. President, members, good morning. The government attaches great importance to building safety in handling unauthorized building works or UBWs. The Buildings Department, BD, has been following the principle of acting in accordance with the law and being impartial to all, to take appropriate actions pursuant to the Buildings Ordinance, BO, Cap 123, and the prevailing enforcement policy. In respect of each case involving UBWs, the BD would take appropriate enforcement actions in an impartial manner without making any special arrangements because of the identity of the owner. I would like to take this opportunity to point out to members once again that the prevailing established procedures of BD for handling UBW cases involving senior government officials and celebrities is mainly embodied in the carrying out of a priority inspection with the objective of ascertaining as soon as possible whether the suspected UBWs exist so as to clear any public concerns. This procedure was introduced in mid-2011. At that time, noting that suspected UBW cases involving senior government officials and celebrities reported by the media had aroused public concerns, the Development Bureau decided that BD should accord priority to carry out site inspection in respect of this kind of cases, so as to clear any public concerns as soon as possible. BD will impartially carry out post-inspection enforcement procedures, including investigation and enforcement, in accordance with the BO and the prevailing enforcement policy on UBWs, and will not be particularly stringent or lenient in its enforcement actions because the owner is a senior government official or celebrity. In respect of the UBW case of Houses 4 and 5 of Peel Rise No. 4, BD has been taking follow-up action in accordance with the above-mentioned established procedures for handling UBW cases involving senior government officials and celebrities. Regarding the unauthorized floor space on the lower ground floor of House 4 of Peel Rise No. 4, mentioned in the question, the owner issued a statement on Friday, the 23rd of November 2012, which included information on that floor space and the sealing up by a brick wall. BD conducted on-site inspection on the first working day that followed, i.e. Monday, the 26th of November, and immediately requested the authorized person, AP, appointed by the owner to provide information and arrange for the opening up of that wall as soon as possible for detailed inspection. During BD's site inspection on the 29th of November, an opening had been made in the wall, and BD staff identified that there was an extended floor space of about 30 square meters behind the wall. After inspection and assessment, BD confirmed that the floor space concerned was an actionable UBW and issued an advisory letter to the owner on the 3rd of December, advising him to rectify the irregularities as soon as possible. My reply to the three-part question is as follows, A and B. In respect of the unauthorized floor space on the lower ground floor of House 4 of Appeal Rise Number 4, further to the issue of an advisory letter by BD on the 3rd of December 2012, advising the owner to rectify the irregularities as soon as possible, the AP appointed by the owner submitted a remedial proposal to BD on the 4th of December 2012. BD studied the proposal in detail and provided comments. Subsequently, the AP has submitted a number of revised proposals having regard to BD's comments. BD also wrote to the AP for a number of times, copying to the owner, providing comments on the revised proposals, and requesting the AP to submit relevant information for consideration. During the vetting process, BD arranged a number of meetings with the AP to discuss technical details, mainly including the structural safety of the proposed remedial works and measures to prevent reuse of the void space concerned. According to the latest position, the AP submitted the latest revised proposal in early April this year and supplementary information later. BD has provided comments on the revised proposal and supplementary information. BD will continue to follow up with the AP appointed by the owner. In accordance with the BO, the owner can only commence the works after BD has accepted the remedial proposal. Other actionable UBWs under the prevailing enforcement policy in Houses 4 and 5 have been removed. As regards the unauthorized floor space at the garden level beneath the parking space at House 5, the remedial works has been completed. The space was backfilled with concrete and the access opening was sealed up to make the use of such void space difficult. C. The policy and stance all along adopted by BD in its enforcement work against UBWs is to require the owner to rectify the irregularities as soon as possible. Under normal circumstances, unless BD has obtained concrete information showing that registered persons under the BO are suspected to be involved in the erection of UBWs, or that the registered persons knowingly submit misrepresented documents to BD, BD will not conduct criminal investigation lightly on whether there have been contraventions to the BO. We must stress that in handling UBW cases involving senior government officials and celebrities, including the York Road and Peel Rise cases mentioned in the question, same as other cases, BD will impartially determine the required follow-up action in accordance with this established principle. The identity of the owner is not a factor for BD to consider whether to conduct criminal investigation. Thank you, President. Mr. Albert Ho. President, according to the Secretary's reply, it's obvious, and it has been reconfirmed, that in respect of the CE's appeal rights mentioned and also the space, underground space, no remedial work has been done. Furthermore, the remedial work proposal has not been confirmed. So the professional engaged by Mr. C.Y. Leung is still exchanging views to the BD. We don't know yet when the remedial works will be completed. So do you agree, Secretary, if this is the case, the Director of Buildings, Mr. Ao Choi Kai, told Tuen Mun District Council on the 7th of May, and I was there, saying that this the problem with the UBWs of the underground space, he said it had been dealt with. Is that misrepresentation? Is that not misleading? There's no remedial proposal confirmed. He could have said, he could only say that it's being handled. He shouldn't say that it had been dealt with. Secretary, on the 7th of May, the Director of Buildings answered questions in the Tuen Mun District Council as regards whether the UBWs of the Peel Rise mentions have been removed. He said the UBWs had been removed and the space under number 5, house number 5, had been filled back. He did not mention the unauthorized floor space on the lower ground floor of House 4 or Pew Rise, number 4. So he was not misleading anyone. As for the remedial work for the underground space of house number 4, the AP appointed by the owner has been in communication with the BD, and some proposals have been submitted. The BD has offered comments, and there have been meetings and also on-site surveys conducted. So the matter is being dealt with. The Secretary hasn't answered my very first question. Mr. Ao Choi Kai, the Director, said that the UBWs, underground UBW, have been dealt with. Was that not misleading? Any supplement? I think an answer has been offered. Well, I have already answered that question. I have no supplement. Mr. James To, I would like to ask the Secretary whether Mr. Ao Choi Kai, the Director, told the Tuen Mun District Council that the underground space UBW have been dealt with. Did you listen to the voice recording? If you haven't, are you not trying to harbor the Director's wrongdoing? Everyone in the community is so concerned about the UBW of the C's mentioned. And the Director said something about the progress without mentioning other UBWs which had not been handled. Can there be a solution by just offering solutions which do not work, and then the Director resort to a game of words to try to shield the CE and try to mislead the community? Mr. Ao Choi Kai answered some questions in the Tuen Mun District Council meeting. I have not listened to the audio recording, but I have seen a transcript, a written record of that reply. There's been some progress in respect of that underground space, UBW. Usually, when remedial work has to be carried out to deal with UBWs in an existing building, they are more complicated. For example, the safety, the difficulty in carrying out the works, and also the safety implication to other structures in nearby. So it's more complicated if we are talking about UBWs in an existing building. After receiving a remedial proposal, the BD would study it in detail, and if necessary, more information will be sought. In following up such cases, or this case, there has been no deliberate delay, like other remedial actions taken against other UBW. The BD has been consistent in its approach. I didn't ask a question about whether it was deliberate. Please repeat the question that has not been answered. Why did the Director only talk about the UBWs which have been dealt with, and did not mention anything about the UBW that had not been dealt with? Secretary, I have already answered that question. I've got nothing to supplement. Mr. James TIEN. President, in answering the last part of Mr. Albert HO's question, it says in handling such cases, there are general principle of fairness, and the identity of the owner is not a factor, and so forth. Well, actually, in the question, Mr. Ho mentioned the mention of another candidate at York Road. So it's not that you would discuss with the owner to work out a solution and leave things as they are. It's not the same approach here with regard to the Pew Rise mentioned. Secretary, it's not appropriate to compare different cases of UBWs. Each case has its own special characteristics. A direct comparison may not be feasible. With regard to the York Road case, the inspection took place on the 4th day after it was reported in the press. It is said that professionals involved in the constructions provided some information. For example, photos and the construction plans were reviewed, showing that there were people such as APs, or structural engineers or building constructors committed an offense deliberately, in that the BD's approval would be required for such work to be proceeded with, and then they might have provided misleading information to the BD. And that's why the BD had to carry out a criminal investigation. Turning to the Pure Rice case, so far, the Buildings Department has not received any similar information. He talked about parity of treatment. So why is it that for the pig case, you would talk to the owner for some negotiation and discussion, but not in respect of the case or involving the York Road mention? When the owner appoints an AP to liaise or to communicate with the BD in order to carry out remedial work, irrespective of the identity of the owner, the BD would communicate with the AP and would try to get more information from the AP. There's no difference in the treatment. Ms. Emily Lau, I want to ask a question about whether this is a case of selective enforcement. The Secretary would say this is complicated. Now 2 people are involved. Both have sensitive status. Our citizens would not like to see that you are lenient to some and strict to some others. When did the prosecution be taken out? You have to consider whether the AP was involved in the construction of the UBW, or whether the APs submitted misleading documents. The question also mentioned agent of the owner. For the York Road case, you prosecuted both. But in the 3rd part, you didn't mention this aspect. And you didn't say that prosecution may be considered if the same situation was verified. So you are unable to identify who were involved in the UBW's concern, and you could not locate the agent of the owner. That's why you would not consider prosecution against these people. And for the other case, you were able to identify these people. Therefore, prosecution was carried out. Is that the case? Secretary, in the enforcement against UBWs, the government acts in a fair and impartial manner. As regards the case referred by Ms. Emily Lau, if the Buildings Department gets hold of information that certain people have violated the law, the BD would seek advice from the Department of Justice, and there will be no omission. No one will be spared. As for this Pure Rice mentioned case, so far we haven't received information of this kind. I don't understand. If you suspect that they participated, it's not just the AP, but also the agent of the owner. I think you should explain to people. Otherwise, people will say that you are just showing favoritism towards C.Y. Leung. Secretary, as I have explained, if in a case it's found that some people have violated the law, then we'll pursue the case and see who should be responsible. No one will be spared. Dr. Kenneth Chan, in answering public criticism, well, the Secretary will say that this is not the full fact. This case was discovered in June last year, and after a long wait of 6 months, Mr. C.Y. Leung mentioned this, responded to this in December, and then in November, and then the BD took action. So my specific question is this. In the first and second part of your reply, or the reply to A and B, it said that the owner, well, you have written letters and received responses from the owner, Mr. C.Y. Leung. So on how many occasions, how many letters have you sent letters to them, or how many letters you have received from the APs? And how many meetings have been convened? Secretary, in the past months, BD and the AP appointed by the owner met a number of times, and on-site inspection was also carried out. The AP submitted a number of proposals, and the BD offered comments on these proposals and asked for supplementary information. Altogether, we can count 6 such occasions. 6 meetings or 6 letters. This is rather ineffective or inefficient. Can we get more figures? Altogether, 6 remedial proposals were submitted. With respect to each and every proposal, the BD studied the proposal and also asked the owner to supply more information. We spent more than 23 minutes on this, so we have moved on to question number 3.
Mr. Allen Leung. Mr. President, Article 45 of the Basic Law provides that in relation to the method for selecting the Chief Executive, quote, the ultimate aim is the selection of the Chief Executive by universal suffrage upon nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with democratic procedures, end of quote. And Article 68 provides that concerning the method for forming the Legislative Council, quote, the ultimate aim is the election of all the members of the Legislative Council by universal suffrage, end of quote. In respect of the qualifications required of a person to be Chief Executive, the Chairman of the Law Committee of the National People's Congress said when he met some members of LegCo on the 24th of March this year that a person who was against the central government would not be allowed to become Chief Executive, and that Chief Executive had to love the country and Hong Kong. Officials from the liaison office of the Central People's Government in the Hong Kong SAR, as well as quite a number of members from the pro-establishment camp, have quoted this comment of the chairman for a number of times and pointed out that persons not meeting the aforesaid qualification requirements are not allowed to become CE. On the other hand, some members of the public have demanded that the members of the nominating committee should be elected on a one-person, one-vote basis in 2017, and that in the LegCo election in 2016, the split voting system should be abolished and the number of seats for functional constituencies should be reduced. In this connection, will the government inform this council, A, whether the government has studied if the aforesaid qualification requirements for Chief Executive have been provided for in the Basic Law, or if such qualification requirements override the Basic Law. If the outcome of the study is in the affirmative of the legal basis, if the outcome of the study is in the negative, how the government ensures that the comments relating to the aforesaid qualification requirements will not affect the constitutional reform proposal on election of Chief Executive by universal suffrage to be put forward by the government according to the provisions in the Basic Law. B, whether the aforesaid qualification requirements for Chief Executive represent the government's stance. If so, of the legal basis. If not, whether the government will, pursuant to the aim of election of Chief Executive by universal suffrage under Article 45 of the Basic Law, put forward a proposal on the election of the members of the nominating committee on a one-person, one-vote basis when it launches its consultation on the Constitution reform System proposal regarding the election of CE in 2017, and C, whether it represents the government's stance to adopt the objectives of abolishing the split voting system and reducing the number of seats for FC when drawing up the method for LECHCO election 2016. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. Mr. President, our reply to the questions raised by Mr. Leong is as follows. A and B. The government of the Hong Kong SAR will launch a comprehensive consultation for the electoral methods of the Chief Executive in 2017 and the Legislative Council in 2016 at an appropriate juncture and initiate the constitutional procedures strictly in accordance with the basic law and relevant interpretation and decisions of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, NPCSC. The Basic Law stipulates that the requirements on the qualifications, integrity, and duties of the Chief Executive in the relevant provisions. For example, Article 44 stipulates that the Chief Executive shall not be less than 40 years of age, with no right of abode in any foreign country, and has ordinarily resided in Hong Kong for a continuous period of not less than 20 years. Article 47 stipulates that the Chief Executive must be a person of integrity dedicated to his or her duties. Regarding the Chief Executive's duties, the Basic Law has even more detailed descriptions. For example, Article 43 provides that the Chief Executive shall be accountable to the Central People's Government CPG and the HKSAR. Article 48 mentions that the Chief Executive shall lead the government of the HKSAR, be responsible for implementation of the Basic Law, implement the directives issued by the CPG in respect of the relevant matters provided for in the Basic Law, conduct on behalf of the government of the HKSAR, external affairs and other affairs as authorized by the central authorities, etc. Constitutionally, the Chief Executive, being the head of the HKSAR, has an important status, is elected in the Hong Kong SAR and appointed by the CPG and accountable to the CPG and the Hong Kong SAR. It is therefore natural and legitimate for both the CPG and Hong Kong SAR to have high expectations towards candidates of the Chief Executive. There have been recently different views and opinions from various sectors of the community on issues relating to the constitutional development, in particular the Chief Executive election, such as the composition of the nominating committee, procedures of nomination, the number of candidates to be nominated for the election, the electoral arrangement for one person, one vote, etc. The government welcomes such rational and pragmatic discussions as they will help us prepare for the public consultation to be conducted in the future. At this stage, the government does not have any preconceived proposal. During the public consultation, the government will listen carefully to the views and specific proposals on the subject from various sectors of the community. Needless to say, all proposals should be based on the Basic Law and relevant interpretation and decisions of the NPCSC. Only on such a basis will it be possible to reach a consensus on constitutional development, to take forward the democracy of Hong Kong, and to implement the target of universal suffrage for the Chief Executive in 2017. C. As stipulated in Article 68 of the Basic Law, the LECHCO of the HKSAR shall be constituted by election. The method for forming the LECHCO shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the HKSAR and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress, and the ultimate aim is the election of all the members of LECHCO by universal suffrage. The government will launch a comprehensive consultation on the electoral method of LECHCO in 2016 at an appropriate juncture. At this stage, the government does not have any preconceived proposal. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Leong. Mr. President, I was listening very carefully and I was reading the Secretary's answer line by line. I don't know whether, Secretary, you think he's answered the question, but now I know it's up to the Secretary's privilege to choose how he should answer this question. Now, in all three parts of my questions, I asked whether. This is how my question was phrased, and the Secretary, however, failed to give me a yes or no answer. His answer was very vague. So if this is really the government's answer, I don't know whether it's the end of the C.Y. Leung administration. Now, I'm not optimistic, but I'll try to ask again. In relation to parts A, B, and C, of the Secretary's reply, I can see this phrase repeating at an appropriate juncture, Mr. President. Mr. President, you could read that right? At an appropriate juncture. So, my question for the Secretary is, what in the mind of the Chief Executive C.Y. Leung is meant by an appropriate juncture, Secretary? Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to Mr. Leung's follow-up question on the specific timetable of the formal public consultation, at present we do not have a specific timetable, but as myself and the Chief Executive mentioned on numerous occasions, we do have sufficient time to launch the public consultation. In this regard, in relation to the CE election in 2017, we still have 4 years' time. I believe we will make good use of the time in between to complete this work. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Mr. President, Secretary, between 2005 and 2007, we talked a lot about the constitutional reform. Now, in relation to Part C of Mr. Alan Leung's question, in relation to reducing the number of seats for functional constituencies, I recalled that there were two directions. One is in terms of a change in terms of quantity. The other is in terms of quality. That means either to change the number of seats for FC or to change the constituencies base for FC. Now, I recalled that for those urging for universal suffrage, they were against the proposal. Now, in relation to the qualitative change, what it meant was the constituency would be enlarged so that Dr. Leung, please ask your question. My question for the Secretary is, today, in relation to Part C of the question, that is to say a quantitative change in the number of seats for FC, well, has there been any change? Second point, any possibility of a qualitative change for the election in 2016? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President. According to Annex 2 of the Basic Law, if we are to make amendments, we must, of course, raise this as an issue during the public consultation exercise upcoming. Now, for Annex 2 of the Basic Law, it has to do with the composition of the Legislative Council, and there are two issues. First of all, whether the seats should be increased from 70, and the other question is for the number of GC seats and FC seats. Now it's the ratio of 35 to 35, and you need to consider whether there has to be any change. And when we roll out the consultation, this will be a part of the issues for consultation. As for the qualitative change, namely changing the constituencies for FC, basically this can be done via amendments to local legislation. So after dealing with the change in accordance with the Annex 2 of the Basic Law, this can be done according to the legislation locally. Well, he hasn't answered my question on, yes, please repeat your question. Well, Part C says reducing the number of seats for FC, and is this the direction that you're heading at the moment, Secretary? Now, over the past period of time, we have been paying attention to the views of the community on the electoral method for electoral election 2016. So on the number of seats for FC, we have noted some suggestions and views. And as I said in my reply, when we launch the public consultation, we will receive more views on that, and we will then form a stance after considering these views. At present, we do not have any preconceived view. Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, just now, Secretary hasn't really answered Mr. Leung's question. So my question for the Secretary is what you meant by a person who was against the central authorities. If there are government officials from the CPG making such remarks on the qualification requirements of the future Chief Executive, will you give an undertaking to request the chairman of the Law Committee of the NPC to clarify openly what is meant by a person who was against the central government would not be allowed to become the chief executive, because we have different perceptions as to what is meant by against the central government. Please answer this question first, Secretary. I think Dr. Helena Wong was talking about the remarks made by Mr. Chiao Xiaoyang. And after such comments had been made, I also had the opportunity to respond to the comments. Now, I recalled that in relation to the comments quoted by Dr. Helena Wong, I responded at the time by saying that I also noted in Mr. Chiao Xiaoyang's speech that what he said does not constitute part of the legal framework, because the qualification requirements should abide by the legal framework, and that's what he meant. My other duty is to conduct the consultation and submit the relevant report on behalf of the CE and the recommendations in accordance with the basic law and the relevant interpretation and the NPCSC decisions. So we are going to submit a legislative proposal, and we need to act in accordance with the relevant laws. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Lau Yu-chung. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, now after the changeover of the government, we have heard a lot of demands from the community, including the electoral methods for the upcoming CE election, and there are suggestions that the consultation should be launched as soon as possible. However, the government all along has been saying that the method or the consultation will be launched at an appropriate juncture, and the government says that there will be sufficient time for doing so. However, the government has not explained what is meant by appropriate juncture and what is meant by sufficient time. So my question for the Secretary is whether or how long will the consultation period last for these two elections? And afterwards, how much time will be needed for collating views? And then how much time will be required before we report to the LegCo? I'd like you to give me a specific answer. Otherwise, if you keep saying an appropriate juncture within a reasonable time frame, you won't be able to address the public's demands. Secretary. In accordance with our established consultation procedure and in accordance with our past experience in the recent constitutional development consultations, well, usually we took 3 or 4 years time, and it also depends on the number of comments and views that we receive. I don't think too much time will be needed, but over the past decade, the problem didn't lie with the length of the consultation period, but rather whether consensus could be reached and whether 2/3 consensus in the community could be reached, and that took up a larger part of the time. So I urge the public to adopt a pragmatic and tolerant and reasonable approach in order to reach a consensus. Your question hasn't been answered. Well, he hasn't answered either of my questions. The first part, he says that he doesn't believe that much time will be needed for collating views. So he hasn't really answered me how long it would take. And what about the legislation process? We understand that local legislation may take a long time. We need to roll out consultation and discussion. So judging from past experience, Secretary, can you tell us how long do you estimate it will last? Now, judging from the previous two constitutional reform exercises and judging from our past experience, it takes about 1 or 2 months' time, but it depends on the amount of views and the content of the views we receive. As for local legislation, and the time needed. When I was a civil servant, usually the practice is that from tabling a bill to passing of the bill, it takes 3 to 6 months time. That's the usual estimate. But nowadays, under the present circumstances, I really can't tell how long it will take. Mr. Chen Chi-shun. Mr. President, you say that filibustering will hamper the normal operation of the administration. For example, questions cannot be asked to monitor the government, but can we really monitor the government by asking questions here? Secretary has not answered that question at all. We're not asking about the procedure, we're asking about the stance. Now, Secretary hasn't answered this basic question. Now, reducing the number of seats for FC in 2016, is that the government's stance? Play your recording. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chan's question. I'm afraid I can't answer the last bit. He says that the recording should be played. I don't have one here. As for the election in 2016, our stance is, as clearly stated out in the reply, we do not have a preconceived stance. Before launching a comprehensive consultation, if the government has any preconceived stance, it will not be fair. Mr. Michael Tien. Mr. President, just now, the President, Mr. Michael Tien, please clip your microphone to the lapel so that we can hear you more clearly. Just now, Mr. Secretary said that Mr. Chow Xiaoyang had said that the person must not act against the central government. And Secretary, your understanding is that it's not a legal requirement, it's just their comment. Now, the final step is for appointment by the CPG. So are you saying that if we elect someone who is against the central government, then when it reaches the 5th step, as far as appointment is concerned, the CPG will need to consider whether the person is acting against the central government? Mr. Tien, the 5th step of the 5-step mechanism is not appointment by the CPG. Anyway, Secretary, there are 3 steps: nomination, election, and appointment. And in the basic law, indeed, it stipulates that ultimately the CE will have to be appointed by the CPG, and this is a substantive appointment. And Mr. Chow Xiaoyang, in his comments, mentioned that the central government will pass its own judgment as to whether this so-called person who's against the central government should be appointed. He also mentioned on the same occasion that this judgment will be made. I cannot speculate what judgment will be made by the central government here. Mr. Albert Ho. Mr. President, now, we all understand that Mr. Chow Xiaoyang is the chairman of the law committee of the NPC. He is a person of status because the NPC, in the 5-step mechanism, is the body to approve whether the reform proposal could be passed. So, in relation to the future electoral methods for the CE election, we must express our concern. Now, today, in relation to Mr. Alan Leong's question, you just cited the same old paragraphs. Now, in relation to so-called the qualification requirements for CE, as mentioned in his comments, is it the case that you dare not say anything in response? Now, Mr. Chow Xiaoyang says that this cannot be put in the legislative text, but does it mean that a very tight selection mechanism will be adopted so that those who do not meet the qualification requirements for CE in the mind of Chow Xiaoyang could be screened away? Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, Now, my question in relation to Mr. Albert Ho's question is in the negative. Now, I see quite clearly in Mr. Xiaoyang's remarks, and I quote, "Now, some say that it's hard to define what is meant by a person who was against the central government. Indeed, that's the case. Well, whether we're talking about the requirement of a person acting against the central government or a person loving the country in Hong Kong, well, these cannot be put into a written legislative text. That's very, very clear. And in relation to the consultation and the proposal, now our basis is the basic law, and we need to abide by the provisions in the basic law in conducting the consultation and submitting our proposal for legislative consideration. That's our basis. We've spent over 23 minutes on this question.
The fourth oral question, Mr. Michael Tian. Thank you, President. The chilled meat and poultry trade has been operating in Hong Kong for over a decade, and the demand for chilled meat and poultry has been rising continuously in recent years. For example, the daily quantity of imported chilled chicken increased from 80 tons in 2008 to 104 tons in 2012. Last year, the quantity of imported chilled chicken accounted for 40% of the total quantity of imported chicken, and those of chilled ducks and geese accounted for 90% and 99% respectively of the total quantities. On the other hand, chilled food products must be kept under refrigeration at 4 degrees or below under the hygiene code, and a license is required under the law for operating a food refrigerating business. As ancillary facilities for the wholesaling of chilled meat and poultry are currently unavailable in Hong Kong, wholesalers can only put chilled meat and poultry into temporary storage in lorries equipped with refrigeration facilities and in freezers for the process of dividing and distributing the goods. It has been reported that targeting at such operation mode of storage prior to distribution, the FEHD prosecutes wholesalers for committing the offense of running cold stores without licenses. Members of the chilled meat and poultry trade have repeatedly written to the Food and Health Bureau requesting the administration to set up an approved distribution and storage center for chilled meat and poultry to centralize the management of the business concerned with a view to reducing food risk. However, no reply has been received. In this connection, will the administration inform this council: A, whether the authorities will consider drawing up and updating relevant legislation and rules to ensure that the whole process of importing and wholesaling chilled meat and poultry conforms to hygiene standards, in order to enhance food safety and provide legislation and rules for the trade to follow so as to avoid prosecution, and B, whether the authorities will consider the request of the trade for setting up an approved distribution and storage center and initiate a site selection study. Secretary for Food and Health. President, ensuring that the food sold in Hong Kong is safe and fit for human consumption is one of the work priorities of the FH Bureau. We're committing to enhancing food safety through a multi-pronged approach. We adopt the From Farm to Table strategy promulgated by the World Health Organization, under which surveillance is carried out at source as well as the import, wholesale and retail levels to safeguard public health. To ensure that the chilled poultry sold in Hong Kong is fit for consumption, we consider it essential to properly monitor the handling process of chilled poultry. My reply to the various parts of the questions is as follows. A, under the agreement reached between Hong Kong and the mainland, all live and fresh food, including chilled poultry, supplied to Hong Kong by the mainland must be imported through Mercantile. Chilled poultry and meat has to come from farms and poultry meat processing plants registered with the relevant mainland inspection and quarantine authority. Upon arrival at the boundary checkpoint, chilled poultry and meat must bear animal health certificates issued by the relevant authorities. All consignments of chilled poultry meat that may be imported will be inspected at Mercantile and then directly transported in the original packaging to food factories for processing, including cutting into parts or repackaging, or to restaurants, markets, and fresh provision shops for sale. Traders may, depending on the operational needs, temporarily keep the imported chilled poultry meat in the original packaging at a licensed cold store before redistributing them to food factories, restaurants, or retail outlets. granting approval to traders to import chilled poultry meat from the mainland into Hong Kong, the Center for Food Safety CFS under the FHD imposes conditions on the goods vehicles used for transportation, requiring that any such vehicle should have an enclosed compartment with refrigerating facility, temperature record, as well as temperature display outside the vehicle for verification. Besides, the CFS requires that the chilled meat poultry should be stored between 0 to 4 degrees throughout the process of transportation from registered processing establishments in the mainland to food factories, restaurants and retail outlets in Hong Kong. The temperature should in no circumstances exceed 8 degrees centigrade. If the business operation of chilled poultry meat importers involves the use of food premises as defined under the Food Business Regulation, importers are required to apply to the FHD for an appropriate food business license, such as a cold store license, a food factory license, or a fresh provision shop license, so they can lawfully handle imported chilled poultry meat. When considering license applications, the FHD will seek advice from government departments concerned to ensure that the applications are in compliance with land use, building safety, planning, fire safety, and hygiene requirements. Hygiene conditions and facilities in premises without a food license cannot be guaranteed, and the storing and processing of chilled poultry meat in these premises presents substantive food safety risks. If the FHD staff should know that there are people who operate unlicensed food businesses, including cold store business, they would act according to the Public Health and Municipal Services Ordinance or the Food Business Regulation to confiscate the items concerned. The existing legislation and control mechanism for regulating chilled poultry meat processing are well established, and the FHD has formulated clear guidelines for reference by the trade. The administration does not consider it necessary to amend the relevant legislation and control mechanism at present. B. Unlike the chilled meat importation business, the live and fresh food industry is different in terms of development history and business nature. The administration has set up public wholesale markets for live and fresh food with a view to providing a platform for on-the-spot price negotiation and transaction. On the other hand, chilled meat and the transaction details, including volume and price, have already been agreed upon among the parties concerned before the consignment arrives in Hong Kong. Besides, traders may rent a cold store or apply for an appropriate license for handling, the distribution and storage of chilled meat. The administration therefore does not have any plans to set up a distribution and storage center for chilled poultry or meat. As regards arrangements of the storage and distribution of chilled poultry meat after importation, importers may, as I said, apply to the FHD for a food business license according to their operational needs, or they can rent a cold store in the market for proper processing of chilled poultry or meat. At present, there are altogether 37 licensed cold stores in Hong Kong, according to information gathered by the FHD from individual licensed cold store operators. There are large-scale cold stores in the market which can provide space for traders to store the chilled poultry or meat, some of which operate round the clock and also provide sufficient parking spaces. We propose that the trade association or individual traders may consider exploring with the cold store operators commercial arrangements that meet their long-term storage needs. Enquiries and applications may also be made to the relevant departments should the trade wish to rent government land for setting up a distribution and storage center for chilled meat and poultry. Thank you. Mr. Michael TIEN. The Secretary spent a long time in giving this very long reply, but I'd like to say that your proposal is not realistic. In summer, the temperature is over 30 degrees and the cold stores are not at grade. The lorries may have to park and they have to take out the chilled meat, they have to wait for the elevator, and they have to go up and sort the poultry and meat, and they come back down, and the meat will be corrupted unless the entire building and the car park are refrigerated. Even the elevators have to be refrigerated. I don't know whether the Secretary understands the pain. I just thank you for the last sentence. If they should find a piece of land and they would like to rent it or buy it, and before that they have to rezone it, we may have to approach the Development Bureau. Will you provide some policy support so as to facilitate their negotiation with the Development Bureau? Secretary. President, Mr. TIEN. Anything that is within the law and which is conducive to ensuring that the provision of food provided to Hong Kong people, including chilled poultry and meat, will be safe, if this is initiated by the trade. And of course, this will involve investment on their part. I think that is to be encouraged. Therefore, within the present legal framework, if there is a need to coordinate the work of bureaus and departments, and if the FH Bureau will need to provide the policy support, I will certainly consider it. Mr. Lo Wai-kwok. Thank you, President. Actually, this has to do with midstream operation, but the Secretary's reply has more to do with processes before and after the midstream operation. In fact, midstream operation is about the distribution to the food processing factories and also to restaurants and markets. So, Secretary, do you admit that there is a need to provide for midstream operation? You mentioned a few licenses, but they have nothing to do with midstream operation. So how can you really practically resolve this problem of midstream operation and also do effective monitoring? Secretary, President, my understanding about imported chilled meat and the process from import to the supply of meat to people, it is like this. The registered farms and also the processing plants on the mainland will supply the meat. There will already be quality control on the mainland, and then they will be imported into Hong Kong, and everything should be imported through Mercantile, and then there is inspection. As Mr. Lo said, of course, there will be some midstream operation about processing and also repackaging and also temporary storage. If there is no need for repackaging or processing, then only temporary storage is required. But some meat may have to be cut up and repackaged. As I said, the food factory license or cold store license might be required. Here in Hong Kong, we have these, and they can apply for licenses for operating these. And also, for cold stores, if the importer does not want to set up a cold store, there are over 30 such cold stores in the market, and we have sought an understanding with the trade that the cold store operators are quite willing to provide the service to importers who can make use of the cold stores before they distribute the goods to restaurants and fresh fruit premises. So there should be a good enough mechanism and also enough facilities for the trade to make use of licenses to set up their own processing factories or to patronize existing cold storage for temporary storage. But if the trade thinks that this is not convenient, they would like to do temporary storage and they are interested in finding a piece of land, then as Mr. Michael TIEN said, as long as they are willing to invest, as long as they can find a site, if they need to go through the land rezoning process, the FH Bureau will provide the policy coordination. Mr. Paul Chair. President, I think what is the concern of the community is that there is no beef in beef balls. So in law enforcement, we have seen such alarming scandals. But this one has to do with the entire food supply chain. The questions said that some meat is imported into Hong Kong with health certificates signed by the mainland. I'd like to know whether we can indeed rely upon all these animal health certificates for the quality of the food, or is it that we also do our own inspection, and have we found problems so that we could see that these certificates were faked? According to agreements reached between Hong Kong and the mainland, all live and fresh food coming into Hong Kong has to go through Mercantile, including chilled poultry, including chicken, geese, and ducks, and also meat. And they also have to come from farms and poultry meat processing plants registered with the relevant mainland inspection and quarantine authority. And also, upon arrival at the boundary checkpoint, the chilled poultry and meat must bear animal health certificates issued by the relevant authorities. Mr. Paul Chair was asking whether we could trust these certificates. This has to do with the inspection and quarantine authority of a country, of our country. We would trust that. But in Hong Kong, we don't only rely on the certificates. Therefore, all chilled food would have to come in only through Mercantile, so that we ourselves can do our own examination and inspection. We'll do it with the naked eye. There will be visual inspection. We'll see whether there is obvious contamination and whether the packaging is problematic. And we'll also take one sample for lab tests. And actually, the CFS also regularly gets samples of food in the market. I always say that annually we reach the ratio set down by international standards. If the examination and inspection shows that there are things that are satisfactory or not, there are regular reports issued. When Mr. Chair asked particularly whether it was found that the certificates were faked or forged, I do not have the information at hand. If you don't mind, I can go back and dig up the information, and I will let the Legislative Council know.
Question 5. Mr. Christopher Cheung. Mr. President, Mr. Cheung, please clip the microphone on your lapel. Mr. President, I declare that I am engaged in the securities and shares business. I have a license. The Securities and Futures Commission, SFC, announced on the 18th of May this year that it received notification from Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange Limited, Hong Kong MX, of its decision to surrender its authorization to provide automated trading services. The authorization, as its trading revenues had been insufficient to support its operating expenses. Since authorized automated trading services providers must have sufficient financial resources, the SFC therefore withdrew Hong Kong MX authorization with immediate effect pursuant to the relevant rules. In this connection, will the government inform this council if it knows, A, when SFC became aware that the Hong Kong MX did not have sufficient financial resources, and B, whether in the past there were other financial institutions which had, on its own volition, surrendered their authorizations or licenses for conducting securities and futures businesses due to failure to meet the relevant requirements. If so, of the details. The chairman of the Hong Kong MX reportedly said that Hong Kong MX would complete a rights issue to raise funds in the amount of $100 million by the end of June for the exchange to resume operation. Whether a financial institution of which the SFC has withdrawn the authorization may have its license restored automatically without the need to reapply for the license. If it may, of the details. Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. Mr. President, On 18th of May 2013, the SFC announced that the Hong Kong MX has notified the SFC of its decision to surrender its authorization to provide automated trading services, ATS, as the trading revenues had not been sufficient to support its operating expenses. An authorized ATS provider must have financial resources sufficient for the proper performance of its functions and obligations. In the circumstances, the SFC issued a formal notice of withdrawal of Hong Kong MX authorization pursuant to Section 98 of the Securities and Futures Ordinance (SFO). The withdrawal took immediate effect. The SFC issued a press release on the same day. On the 21st of May 2013, the SFC issued a further statement on the withdrawal of Hong Kong MX ATS authorization, indicating that the SFC had initiated an investigation into suspected irregularities in the financial affairs of the Hong Kong MX. And referred certain matters to the Commercial Crime Bureau, CCB, of the police as the suspected irregularities are serious. The SFC indicated that it would continue its investigation and would cooperate fully with the CCB. The two press releases of the SFC are attached to this main reply for members' reference. I understand Mr. Cheung's concern over the case in question. However, as the investigations by the SFC and the CCB are ongoing, it's not appropriate for me to make any specific comment on the case. That said, having consulted the SFC, I would provide some general information for members' reference. An ATS provider is someone who provides an electronic platform on which financial products may be traded or cleared. In general, an authorized ATS provider will be required to have sufficient financial resources for the proper performance of its functions and obligations. When considering whether there is sufficient financial resources, the SFC will take into consideration key factors such as the projected expenditure of the ATS operation from time to time, which is affected by the size and characteristics of the trading platform and the markets traded on the platform. It follows that the financial resources required may change over time as the size and characteristics of the ATS operation changes. According to the SFC, there have been no other cases of authorized ATS providers failing to meet financial requirements so far. With reference to the case of the Hong Kong MX, Mr. Cheung raised in his question as to whether a financial institution of which SFC has withdrawn the authorization may have its license restored automatically without the need to reapply for the license. The SFC pointed out that it's not appropriate to comment on matters specific to the Hong Kong MX as investigations by the SFC and CCB are still afoot. In general, once an ATS authorization is revoked, an application for the same authorization would be treated as a fresh application. The SFC will look at the merits of each application and take into account all relevant factors, including all information in its possession. The same approach is adopted vis-à-vis licensed persons. Mr. Cheung. Mr. President, the Secretary did not answer my question as to when the SFC became aware that the Hong Kong MX did not have sufficient financial resources. There is a non-executive director of the Hong Kong of the SFC and a member of the EXCO that in the past year it was realized that there were financial problems of the Hong Kong MX, but all the time just before the deadline, financial resources will be made available. How come the SFC adopted such a lax approach so that the Hong Kong MX was let off so easily? Is it because there was an oversight? If instead of the Hong Kong MX is just a brokerage firm, I don't think that it will be so lenient. The place will simply be closed. There won't be any leniency or grace period. However, in this case, the Hong Kong MX was in a position to negotiate with the SFC. The Hong Kong MX is a licensed entity. It has to maintain for sufficient financial resources sufficient for the proper performance of its functions and obligations. So I'd like to ask, in the past year, what has the SFC taken as measures to ensure that the Hong Kong MX has fulfilled its performance functions and obligations? Is that the case that there has been some false instrument being uttered? And in relation to the requirement of the Hong Kong MX to declare its financial position, why is it the case that with insufficient financial resources in the past year, it's allowed to recruit new members? Is it problematic? Mr. Cheung, I didn't really hear you clearly, but it seems that you have raised a lot of questions. May I read it again? Please do not read it all over again. Just ask one supplementary question. Well, the cornerstone of the financial market is confidence and everyone's equal before the law. The regulation on financial institutions should be fair. Sorry, Mr. Cheung, you're still not asking questions. Refrain from making comments. Ask a question. Well, I think that the case is handed to the CCB for follow-up. How can we ensure that in the end, the investigation will be completely separated from the SFC? The SFC and to ensure that the SFC will fully cooperate with the CCB. I advise members not to to have lengthy speaking notes when they're asking supplementary questions. Secretary. Well, there are many questions in Mr. Cheung's supplementary. And I understand his concern over the case, but since the case is being investigated into by the SFC and the CCB, it's not appropriate for me to comment on the case. But what I can say is the SFC and the police will certainly carry out its investigations in an impartial manner. May I allow to say something in answer to what Mr. Cheung raised? He asked whether the treatment to an ATS provider is different from other market participants. I feel the need to answer. Well, where does the difference lies? ATS service provider and other licensed persons in the securities and futures sector are different, so a direct comparison is inappropriate. The ATS provider is a market operator, not an intermediary, and the trading services provided is one of the key areas of regulation. It provides service related to trading and not clearing, and they do not hold clients' assets. So ATS providers are regulated by different provisions in the SFO. Mr. James Toh. The first question of Mr. Cheung was not answered. non-executive director of the SFC, Mr. Chen Kam-lam, in his performance of his duties, he took the risk of divulging confidential information to tell us that if the administration cannot give us an answer on something that is confirmed by the non-executive director of the SFC, Mr. Chen Kam-lam, then is it the case that they're trying to harbor something? They're trying to conceal something. The latest development, as reported by the SCMP, is that the police asked the SFC not to carry on with the investigation so as not to get in the way. There is only one administration. So are there matters more complicated that we are not aware of? Mr. To, please ask your question. My question is, in these circumstances, the administration did not confirm with us, did not tell us when they knew, and did not tell us information about the latest situation that the police asked the SFC not to carry on with this information. How can they convince us that this will be a comprehensive, in-depth and impartial investigation? Secretary, and I'm sure that members fully understand that this case is under investigation. Is not appropriate for me to comment on the case. But from the beginning to the end, we've always said that the SFC will and the police will carry out investigation impartially. And the SFC and the CCB are carrying out joint investigations. What hasn't been answered? Please make your question clear. Does the police ask the SFC not to carry on with the investigation? Secretary, I reiterate that on this case, the SFC and the police are conducting investigations together. Mr. Dennis Kwok, I have an information obtained from the company's registry. The Hong Kong MX on the 10th of January 2013 endorsed a special resolution, that is to endorse a rights issue to raise $100 million. And so far, the Hong Kong MX has yet to lodge a Form SC1, that is in relation to declaration of a new stocks. So that means that it hasn't been done yet. And on the 10th of January this year, there was they are aware that there was financial difficulties of the MX. Why did the SFC wait till May to revoke its license? Has they been partial to its enforcement of laws? Are they not aware of the document I just mentioned, that is on the 10th of January? Secretary, I thank Mr. Kwok for the question, and I thank his research on the matter. I cannot comment on the specific details on the case. What I can say is that the investigation is ongoing, and what we can discuss and what I am prepared to discuss is matters related to the policy. And I believe the SFC is willing to attend, as far as I know, that in the next panel meeting of financial affairs, that they will attend to answer questions on policy. What hasn't been answered? In January, we all see that there are documents showing that they are encountering financial difficulties. Why wait till May? Secretary, I've already answered. Mr. Adrian Sheck.
That has aroused international market concern. I'd like to ask a policy issue. Can the Secretary please explain the difference between voluntary withdrawal of ATS and termination of ATS? What is the difference? And in this case of voluntary withdrawal is where HKMX is. Will the government issue a termination order on the ATS?
From what I understand, what happened according to the press release issued by the SFC, the SFC is concerned about the financial affairs of the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange, and on that basis, the SFC is going to take action to terminate the licensing, the authorization. And on that basis, the Hong Kong Mercantile Exchange decided to withdraw from the authorization. And as far as SFC is concerned, that is basically allowing, that fact will allow the market to have the time to clear the trade, to settle the trade for the interest of protecting the market participants and achieving the objective. And of course, when you have more questions into the nature of the authorization, I'm sure that SFC will be very happy to answer the questions in the panel meeting.
主席，即係
Mr. President, just now I was asking about the difference between a surrender and a withdrawal. The Secretary did not explain. Sorry, Mr. Shek, please repeat your. You have repeated your question. Let's wait for the Secretary to answer. Secretary, Mr. Shek was asking about the difference between surrender and withdrawal. I answered that the SFC mentioned in the press release the development of the matter. The SFC agreed with the surrender of the license because this will achieve its objectives. If an operator wants to make an application, it will be treated as an application afresh. Mr. Chan Kim-po, in the main reply, attached is the press release in May on the 18th and the 21st that the company has already completed with all the process and money is returned. It seems that the security brokerage firms have not suffered any losses. Some people think that the MX is only dealing in gold and silver, so there was not much room for growth. So have you considered proposing a 3 or 5 year plan to ensure its survival? I believe that when the SFC issue an ATS authorization, it has considered a number of factors. And it includes financial resources and risk management, because we're talking about a trading platform, and also the soundness or financial soundness of the platform is considered. Transparency and obligations are also considered, and there are requirements set out. When dealing with an application, the SFC will certainly consider whether the operation meets all the requirements. As the market changes, the SFC will accordingly impose different regulatory requirements. Mr. Lam Tai-fai, a lot of people from the financial sector said that the incident of the Hong Kong MX is the biggest financial scandal and fraud since the reunification. And this has triggered discussions here in Hong Kong and is attracted concern on the mainland. You have to give me an answer, Secretary. My question is that recently Mr. Paul Chan lied again. He said that when he recommended Barry Cheung, the chairman of the Hong Kong MX, to be the chairman of the URA, he did not know that he had financial difficulties, or that the Hong Kong MX had financial difficulties. But the thing is that the FS had to agree. He had no alternatives. So can the Secretary, on our behalf, ask the CE's office to get or principal officials and members of the EXCO to conduct a thorough inquiry to find out which secretary, CE members knew beforehand of this matter. That is, Barry Cheung and the Hong Kong MX have financial difficulties but failed to take immediate action. Can we be given a detailed report to dispel concern of all of Hong Kong people and to let the financial sector to know thoroughly what's going on? Secretary, I believe that there are lots of details that are of concern, but the case is being investigated into, and it's exactly because of this reason I cannot comment. Mr. Lam Tai-fai asked a question, and it's about the appointment of Mr. Barry Cheung. In the press release of the Development Bureau, the reason of the appointment was set out. I see no need for me to supplement. My question was, out of the principal officials and members of the EXCO, which one knew beforehand that the Hong Kong MX and Mr. Cheung encountered financial difficulties? So through you, I would like to ask the CE's office to carry out a detailed investigation. This is a humble request. Your question is asked. Secretary, anything to add? Well, I have already given an answer about the reason. We've spent over close to 24 minutes on this question.
The last oral question, Mr. KWOK Wai-keung.
Thank you, Mr. President. With effect from the 1st of May 2013, the statutory minimum wage rate has been adjusted upward from $28 per hour to $30, calculated on the basis that each household member works for 9 hours per day and 26 days per month. The monthly household income of $14,040 of a dual income two-person household earning minimum wages will have exceeded the 2013-2014 waiting list income limit for public rental housing (PRH) for two-person households, that is $13,750. In this connection, will the government inform this Council A, of the number of households whose applications for allocation of PRH units in each of the past 3 years have been rejected because their household income had exceeded the prescribed waiting list income limits as a result of all the household members earning minimum wages? B, whether the Hong Kong Housing Authority, HA, has collected the following information. Among the households on the waiting list, of the current number of those whose members all earn minimum wages, and the per capita monthly income of these members, if it has of the details. If not, whether the government will suggest the HA to collect such information. And C, given that the Mandatory Provident Fund Schemes Authority, MPFA, has, in the light of the adjustment to the statutory minimum wage rate, suggested that the minimum level of the relevant income for Mandatory Provident Fund contributions be increased to $7,100. Whether the authorities will recommend the HA to make reference to the practice of the MPFA and prescribe the statutory minimum wage rate as one of the criteria for setting the waiting list income limits, if they will not offer reasons for that. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Mr. President, the Hong Kong Housing Authority, HA for short, has put in place a waiting list system through which low-income families that cannot afford to rent private accommodation may apply for public rental housing. Waiting list income and asset limits have been set to determine the eligibility of PRH applicants. Details are set out at Annex A. The limits are reviewed once annually to keep abreast of the latest socio-economic circumstances. My reply to the 3 parts of the question as raised by Honorable KWOK Wai-keung is as follows. On parts A and B of the question, currently, HA does not require applicants to indicate whether they are receiving the statutory minimum wage, SMW, and therefore does not have the number of cases as requested in the question. I wish to point out that the SMW only stipulates the minimum hourly rate. However, since the actual working hours and other employment arrangements, such as whether rest time is counted on wage assessment, etc., of each individual is different. Even if they are receiving SMW, their exact wage level and total monthly income may vary among them and be different. The existing practice of HA is to require PRH applicants and their household members to declare the total monthly income at the time of application and prior to PRH allocation to assess whether PRH applicants and their household members satisfy the waiting list income limit applicable to the respective household size. Nonetheless, the HA has taken into account changes in income in the newly revised waiting list income limits. HA's Subsidized Housing Committee (SHC) examined the review mechanism of waiting list income limits at its meeting on the 7th of February this year. The existing expenditure-based mechanism has worked well and has provided an objective assessment of the affordability of households applying for PRH. Changes in income, including the implementation and changes in SMW, will be reflected in changes in expenditure in the long run. However, in view of the fact that changes in income may not be reflected in a timely manner in the waiting list income limits before the results of the latest household expenditure survey are updated, HXC has agreed to refine the mechanism for reviewing the income limits. Under the refined mechanism, the non-housing cost component is suggested by either the change in Consumer Price Index A, excluding housing cost, or the nominal wage index obtained through the Labor Earnings Survey conducted quarterly by the Census and Statistics Department, whichever is higher. The nominal wage index covers occupational groups at non-managerial professional levels, for example, technical, clerical, service workers, and craftsmen, etc., who are most likely to be applicants for PRH. Therefore, the change in nominal wage index can help in gauging changes in income of the PRH target group and in reflecting the impact on their income after the introduction of SMW. Regarding Part C of the question, under the Mandatory Provident Fund (MPF) system, MPF contributions of employees are based on their individual income. However, there is no projection on their household income. As regards whether an applicant's household income satisfies the waiting list income limit, it is dependent on the applicant's overall household income. Therefore, it is not appropriate to adopt the calculation method for MPF contributions as a criteria for determining the waiting list income limits. Under the current policy of PRH allocation, the waiting list income limits are derived on a household expenditure basis to assess the affordability of applicants. The basis for the relevant policy consideration is different from that of MPF contributions. After comprehensive assessment, HA considers that the enhanced mechanism on the review of the waiting list income limits have taken into account changes in income, including implementation of the SMW, while maintaining the well-functioning household expenditure-led review mechanism based on affordability. Using the refined review mechanism, the derived waiting list income limits for 2013-14 have increased by an overall average of 6% over the income limits for 2012-13. The comparison figures are at Annex B. Mr. President will continue to conduct annual reviews of the waiting list income limits in accordance with the refined mechanism, with a view to responding to the latest socio-economic circumstances and assessing the affordability of households applying for PRH in an objective manner. Mr. KWOK Wai-keung. Thank you, Mr. President. I don't think the Secretary has answered my question directly, and he hasn't really got all the relevant figures. In paragraph 2 of his main reply, he has emphasized that changes in income has been taken into account. And then for the mechanism for assessing the income limits, it has always been very objective in looking at the affordability of the PRH applicants. But what about those who have failed to meet the requirements? What about the affordability? Now, for the SMW rate, it is $30. Now, we would like to pitch it at $35 to $37. It was $33 that was proposed a few years ago. $30 an hour. I don't think you can make your ends meet. It is already on the low side. For a dual-income two-person household, if they are only earning the minimum wage, how come that they are not eligible for PRH? So what is meant by an affordability level? For low-income, dual-income, two-person households, I think they're supposed to be the target of subsidy under the subsidized housing policy. Secretary, Mr. President, when the HA decides on the waiting list income limit, we look at the affordability. When it comes to affordability, it means that we look at their income level to see whether they can afford a home in the private market. We have always been looking at the household expenditure. For household expenditure, there are two parts. First of all, the housing cost. Second, the non-housing cost. For the housing cost, for the past 3 years, we have the average space allocated to waiting list applicants on the part of the HA, and there will be different flat sizes for different household sizes. So we will look at the average figures, and we'll look at the unit rent for a private flat comparable to PRH. And we'll also look at the non-housing costs, and then we'll look at the change in CPIA, excluding the housing cost. And on top of that, we will look at the contingency, which is 5% of the household expenditure. So, as I have said, the HA has already reviewed the mechanism. Changes in income is perhaps important, and therefore, as said out in my main reply, we will also look at the changes in the nominal wage index. So we will take whichever is higher, that is either the Consumer Price Index A or the nominal wage index. Not yet answered. Will he get hold of the figures and when? You didn't actually ask this question. If you are interested in this, please queue up again. Ms. Chen Yun-han, Secretary, I want to know whether you wrote this answer. If it is indeed your own answer, it goes against your status as a scholar. The wage rate has already been raised to $30. I think you need to consider the proposal to adopt $33 as the yardstick. For the MPFA, I think it did take into account the views of the community, so they're raising the relevant income to $7,100. Please ask your question, Ms. Chen. Now the HA has committed a mistake. It is a blunder. I don't think you should bear the responsibility. Otherwise, your status as a scholar will be affected. So how are you going to introduce a remedy? In February, you reviewed the income limits, and yet for two-person households having a dual income, even if they only earn the minimum wage, they won't be eligible for PRH. Please don't state your opinions. Yes, I understand. Please ask your question and sit down. I want to know if the Secretary can remedy the situation owing to the mistake committed by the HA. Mr. President, of course, I have always been a scholar, and I don't just read out from the script penned for me by my colleagues. I do digest the content. We don't start off with the income of the household. We'll look at the household expenditure. We'll look at a reasonable level of expenditure with the housing cost and the non-housing cost. And we'll also look at the household size. And then we'll try to see what the income limit should be. So if somebody earns below the income level, then we suppose that he or the household cannot afford a home in the private market. Every year when we reconsider the WL income limits, the SHC will have a lot of discussion. There is a lot of struggle there. If we raise it too high, then more will be eligible, and vice versa. In February this year, some members at the SHC did refer to the implications of the statutory minimum wage. It is correct, but we can't just look at one single factor. So we need to achieve continuity, and we should also be fair and consistent towards households of different sizes. Now, the SHC of the HA is of the view that with the refined mechanism, we can also look at changes in the nominal wage index that can become the basis of calculation. Now, with the introduction of the SMW and with changes in the SMW rate, there will be changes in the nominal wage index. Ms. Chen was saying that in the case of a dual income two-person household earning statutory minimum wage only, and what about 4 persons, 3-person households, all working and only earning the minimum wage? I don't think it is an easy problem to resolve. Mr. Ng Sing, Mr. President, Ms. Chen, he is the chair of the HA. Please repeat which part he hasn't answered. Now, even for the MPFA, they are more caring. They're raising the relevant income level to 7,100. He hasn't really said whether he will remedy the situation. Ms. Chen, I think he has answered the question, but you are not happy with his answer. Now, if members think that the policy as reflected in the Secretary's reply is not agreeable to you, please follow up via other channels. Mr. Ng Sing, according to the main reply, I would like to refer to the second paragraph on the second page. Mention is made about the review carried out at a meeting held on the 7th of February. And it is said that it is a well-functioning mechanism. Secretary, in fact, in the community and in this chamber, we have always said that we are not happy with this scenario. That is, for a long period of time, there are 80,000 people who obviously earn a level of income above the income limits, and they are still residing in PRH flats. I think you should practice loophole, and we should also target at the households who have resorted to transfer of assets so that the public assets can be put to reasonable allocation. Secretary, I think what Mr. Ng was saying was that we have this policy to allocate the public resources rationally. That is the so-called better-off tenant policy. If there are households whose income exceeds our income limits by a few times, their income exceeds our income limits by a few times, and if their assets are also a few times that of our asset limits, then they will be invited to leave the PRH. As I have said, we have 2 pillars. First of all, we look at the income, whether the income exceeds the income limits. Second part is the assets, and there are also asset limits. If the assets exceed the asset limits, then the household will be regarded as a better off household, and they should vacate their flat. Well, the Long-Term Housing Strategy Committee has also come up with different views, like the rest of the community. We are still considering whether there's room to enhance or improve the policy. Mr. KWOK Wai-keung, if I remember correctly, I think last month it was said among members of the Long-Term Housing Strategy Committee that since there is a points system, it means that the applicants are under a very strict rule. Now, it means that they would never get to be allocated a flat. Now, for the 2-person households or 3-person households that are earning minimum wages, please ask your question. Now, for a singleton household, if you are only earning statutory minimum wage, you get a PRH flat, but not so for a dual income household. So are you saying that you would like to drive people to apply in the queue for singletons? Well, indeed, some members did refer to the point made by that member. But then, as I have said in my main reply and the supplementary replies, when the HA decided on the income limits, they looked at the affordability, and it is based on the household expenditure, including housing costs, non-housing costs, and a 5% contingency. Of course, in individual cases, applicants may be earning a wage that exceeds the income limit, or in a household, the overall income may exceed the income limit, and there will be a problem. It is never easy to draw the line correctly. Just now, I referred to a 3-person or 4-person household. If we assume that all the household members work full-time, they have an income, and if they receive minimum wage, then the entire system would be very different. It would be a system different from the current one, which is based on the housing expenditure. Just now, Ms. Chen referred to the MPFA. As I have said in the main reply, the basis of calculation arises from the contributions to the MPF. It is different in terms of the purpose when it comes to the income limits of the HA. Not answered. I want to know whether it is the policy of the HA to force people to apply as a singleton. Well, Secretary, now for singletons, they have a quota points system. It is a different queue, and in fact, there isn't any performance pledge like an average waiting time of 3 years. Mr. Leung Kwok-hong. Mr. President, I don't think the Secretary has answered my question. That is the question I'm going to ask. Will the HA change its principles so that households earning statutory minimum wage will be able to get a PRH flat? So change the basis from expenditure to income, so that should become the eligibility. In other words, those earnings, the statutory minimum wage rate will be eligible for PRH flat. Secretary, of course, as pointed out in the main reply, the HA decides on the income limits as well as other eligibility criteria. We have to reflect the latest socio-economic conditions in the society. We have to progress with time. All along, when I say all along, it means for the past 20, 30 years, the income limits have always been set on the basis of affordability, which means the expenditure. Irrespective of the income, we want to look at the expenditure. The expenditure levels can reflect the affordability of the low-income households. In other words, they cannot afford a home in the private sector. Indeed, with the introduction of the statutory minimum wage, there have been changes, and so we try to reflect the changes by referring to the nominal wage index. As to whether we should only adopt the statutory minimum wage rate as the criteria, it will be difficult to define the working hours, and it is debatable. In any event, if we look at the wage only, what about 3-person household, 4-person household? We have to make assumptions as to how many family members are at work. But then, of course, all the views expressed here will be referred back to the Housing Authority. Your question not answered? My question is as follows. Now, yes, you have an established policy. It doesn't matter if you still keep it. Please also introduce a second set of criteria. If anybody can meet one set of criteria, they should be eligible. So you want to introduce a second set of criteria, mainly based on statutory minimum wage, as simple as that. I can't arbitrarily speak on behalf of the SHC or the Housing Authority. They need to discuss the matter thoroughly. I've explained the basis of their decision. And in fact, early this year, the question of the statutory minimum wage was raised. The current arrangement is such that we would like to strike a balance. In the past, we looked at the CPIA changes under non-housing costs. Nowadays, we are also looking at the changes in the nominal wage index, and whichever is higher will be adopted for the purpose of calculation. Of course, we cannot resolve the problem outlined by Mr. Kwok, that is a dual income two-person household not getting a PRH flat. I can fully understand members' concerns. They will be reflected to the HA. We'll spend over 23.5 minutes. That's it for all the oral questions.
議案
Motions.